All right, everybody. Well, welcome back to the Professional Development Webinar Series for Parish and Diocesan Ministers. Thanks for joining us today for a presentation titled Transforming Your Ministry in Just 3 Moments of the Day with Father Chris Collins. For those of you who are with us for the first time this year, my name is Jared Dees. I'm the Digital Marketing Manager at Ave Maria Press, and I'll be your moderator for today's webinar. This webinar, once again, we're happy to have our partners back. It's brought to you exclusively by Ave Maria Press, but in partnership with the National Conference for Catechetical Leadership, the National Association for Lay Ministry, and the National Federation of Priest Councils. Everyone in our audience is muted today, but you can ask questions, and you can send questions to our presenter using the questions section of the GoToWebinar panel, which you can see displayed here. Please take a moment now to find that if you didn't already find it by telling us where you're from, and click that send button at the bottom right-hand corner and send your questions to Father Chris, and I'll read as many of those as I can at the end of the presentation today. I'd also like to note this webinar is being recorded, and we'll send a recording to you later on via email. Also, during the live portion of the presentation, you'll be able to see Father Chris and myself with the webcam, but the presentation recording will only have the slides. So now that we've gone through all the technical stuff, let's go on to welcome Father Chris Collins. Father Chris is the chair of the board of the Apostleship of Prayer in the United States. He entered the Society of Jesus in 1995, was ordained a priest in 2006, and now teaches theology at St. Louis University. Collins is the author of The Word Made Love, and his newest book is 3 Moments of the Day, Praying with the Heart of Jesus, which we'll be talking about today. Father Chris, welcome, and thanks so much for coming with us and sharing your time with us today.
Thanks very much to you, Jared, and thanks to everybody for tuning in here. This is my first webinar, so we'll see how it goes, but I look forward to it.
All right. Well, here I'm going to hand over the controls to you, so you'll have a little invitation to show your screen.
Let's see if I did say show my screen. So how's that?
It should be coming. There we go.
Is that working out okay?
Yep.
Okay. Now I'll get the slideshow going. I hope. Play from the start. Okay, great. So far so good, eh?
You're good to go.
All right. Well, thanks very much, Jared. And I just thought maybe we could, especially since this is a book about prayer in daily life, maybe we could start off with a little moment together and just to take a little bit of quiet in the midst of maybe a busy day and let the Lord calm our hearts and open up our minds, stir up our desires so that we can come to know Him and to love Him more. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen. Lord Jesus, we come together today in your name, and we remember how when your disciples asked you how to pray, you taught them and you taught us to pray that familiar prayer, the Our Father, to first of all recognize that we are beloved children of your Father, and that we are to be able to share in the same relationship that you have with him as beloved sons and daughters. And yet we know that it's sometimes difficult to live in that identity, in that truth, and in that light. So we ask your Spirit to be upon us today to help us to see more clearly the depth of the love that you have for us and the kind of love that we can offer to the world in your name. So we just ask you to guide us and in our conversation, and especially guide us in our desire to work in your church and in your world, making known your love to all people. We pray this in your name. Amen. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Okay, so we can get started here. I'd like to first, again, thank everybody for being together here. And this is, I thought I might say a little bit about where this book came from, where the idea came from for 3 Moments of the Day, Praying with the Heart of Jesus. And in fact, one of our webinar attendees, Father Phil Hurley, is a very good Jesuit friend of mine, and he's in Raleigh, North Carolina right now at a big parish and just starting that new job there. And actually this book and the experiences that I've had that have led me to be able to reflect on the nature of the heart of Christ and how we are drawn to that heart, it comes in large part thanks to friendships like that I had with Father Phil Hurley. So I'm going to say thank you especially to him. But I've kind of stumbled into this spirituality of the Sacred Heart and the apostleship of prayer, of which I'm now a member of the board, and then actually Father Phil Hurley worked as a youth and young adult outreach leader for the apostleship of prayer as well. And it's if you're familiar with that organization, it's a work that's been given to the Jesuits by the Holy Father going back over 100 years, and it's with the idea of promoting devotion of the Sacred Heart and living a Eucharistic life, and making, especially there's something about the spirituality of making an offering of our day and all the little things of the day for union with the heart of Christ, and so that we can make his love known in the world. So that's kind of the gist of the spirituality behind this book that I've tried to uncover a little bit. But that's something I'll say right off the bat that was not familiar to me at all growing up. I grew up in Phoenix, Arizona, and I grew up Catholic, and youngest out of 6 kids, went to Catholic schools my whole life except for kindergarten. But as I was growing up there, I was born in 1971. That's important to note, after the Second Vatican Council, and the whole devotional life of the Church was not really anything, excuse me, that I had grown up with. You know, we went to Sunday Mass, but as far as a lot of the imaginative framework of the devotional life of the Church, that there wasn't really much of that going on, as I recall, at least as a kid. So a lot of this is kind of unfamiliar to me. Later on, I came to, when I joined the Jesuits after teaching high school for a couple of years in Minnesota, I was in Winona, Minnesota. I joined the Jesuits in '95, and we do all kinds of spiritual reading along the way, and one of the things that I read was a book by Pedro Arrupe, who had been the general of the Society of Jesus. And in his last, as some of you might be familiar, he had a stroke after several years in leadership of the Jesuits, but his last letter to the whole Society of Jesus, the Jesuits around the world, he talked about the Sacred Heart, devotion of the Sacred Heart, and this is in 1981. And he said, you know, that's 15 years after the council's over, and he said, you know, there are a lot of reasons why we've kind of let the devotional life of the Church go, because maybe it had become maybe too saturated or too sentimental, and all kinds of different reasons. Maybe part of it was that we in the Church, we became more cerebral about our faith. We had a big emphasis on being more refined theologically and so on, and so a lot of that devotional life maybe we were even embarrassed of, and so we kind of let that go for quite a while. But he said to the Jesuits, he kind of challenged us to rediscover the devotion of the Sacred Heart, because he said if there's a renewal of the devotion of the Sacred Heart within the Jesuits, that's going to be a sign of the renewal of the whole order. It's that important, he said. So I read that as a novice, and I thought to myself, well, that seems important. I'd like to see renewal of the Society of Jesus that I just joined, and growth and vitality. So, but I still didn't really know what he meant by that devotion of the Sacred Heart. So, but I did a little bit of reading on it. In Him Alone Is My Hope. That's the name of the book, that collection of essays on the Sacred Heart from him. So anyway, that was in the back of my mind a little bit. And then when I was a novice, one of the things they do with us novices in the Jesuits is they send us out on what they call experiments. They'll send us out for 6 weeks, couple of months, 3 months, to do some sort of an experiment and see what happens between the Lord and us, especially to put us out into kind of vulnerable circumstances and to see how we rely on the Lord or not, and how we manage through all that. So one of the things that my province had me do was go out to our high school that we have. We have a mission on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation in South Dakota, and I'm just flashing to another slide here, just to back up one moment there. The book that I've written is really kind of a follow-up on a book that Father Jim Kubicki had written a few years back for Ave Maria Press, and that's called Rediscovering Devotion to the Sacred Heart, A Heart on Fire, and so that just kind of situates a little bit where this book that I've done is sort of a follow-up on that. I'll say more about Father Jim Kubicki, who's the current executive director of the Apostleship of Prayer too. He's done a great job of renewing the whole Apostleship of Prayer in the U.S. So my book is in kind of a follow-up on his. But back to the story about my own experience. When I was on that reservation, I was sent out there in January to South Dakota. By the way, again, I was born in Phoenix, Arizona. That's important in the desert. And they sent me out to Pine Ridge, South Dakota in January. And my job was to teach high school religion at Red Cloud Indian School, the Jesuit school on the reservation. The Jesuits have pastoral care. All the parishes on the reservation belong to the society, and we also have a couple of grade schools and a high school there. And so my job was to come in the middle of a year into a high school and teach religion. So if any of you, many of you, I'm sure, maybe are teachers now or have taught in schools, and maybe especially with high schoolers, getting dropped into a school of any sort in the middle of the year is not a great idea. It's not a great formula for success. And there were kind of multiple difficulties in this. First of all, coming in the middle of the year, it's teaching religion to high school kids, which is already a challenge in itself. But it's also the context of that reservation. This is the reservation where Wounded Knee is, if you might be familiar with Wounded Knee. It's the place of the last big battle, massacre of Wounded Knee in the late 19th century between the U.S. Army and the Lakota tribe. And so there's a place of tremendous historic pain and suffering, and there's also tremendous poverty on that reservation. It's usually one of the poorest reservations in the country, and there's something like 70% unemployment there. There's a tremendous amount of alcoholism and drug abuse. The whole family structure has largely broken down. Kids growing up on the reservation rarely grow up with their mother and a father. Usually they're maybe raised by a grandmother for a while and maybe an auntie for a while, and kids get passed around. It's a very unstable kind of social situation at this point. It wasn't always that way, but it is now. And so there's a lot of challenges in that whole context. And so then there's also the difficulty, they're not just high school kids, which is challenging itself, but that cultural setting of Indian high school kids, Lakota specifically, being taught by yet another white guy that comes onto the reservation, and also from the church. There's kind of a lot of ambivalence about the church in some ways on the reservation too. Some people are very grateful that the church is there. A lot of people also kind of associate the church with the U.S. government and all of the historical problems that they've experienced. They sort of lump it all together. So there's also a great deal of resentment toward the church and so on. So anyway, all that is to set up a context of great difficulty. I had taught high school for 2 years before I joined the Jesuits, and then when I finally joined, I went out to Pine Ridge. I thought, well, I've already taught high school. I can probably do okay at this. But it was much more challenging than my experience prior to that. And one of the things that would happen is that I would try to teach during the day, and I would basically meet defeat in the classroom on a daily basis in all kinds of different ways. Kind of the usual sort of sullenness of some high school kids, but I also came to realize there's a whole lot more going on in these kids' lives that make it that much harder. But for myself, at least, I was focused on my failure as a teacher at that point. And so I would try to teach during the day. It wouldn't go very well. We also did a school bus run out there, and in the afternoon I'd drive the school bus 30, 40 miles away and drop the kids off. And that part usually went better than the teaching part, the school bus driving. So I'd come back in the afternoon and I would just be discouraged, but I would go into the chapel, the Jesuit chapel there of our community, and just a little chapel, and I would sit right in front of the Blessed Sacrament, and I guess I thought I was praying at the time, but I think when I look back on it, I wasn't so much praying as I was just feeling sorry for myself, frankly, and feeling defeated in the classroom, and I wasn't really talking to Jesus so much. I think I was talking more to myself about how bad I felt about my own teaching, and sometimes I would talk to myself about how bad those kids were in my classroom. I'd be angry that they weren't responding well to what I was trying to give them. I came into that situation wanting to offer the love of Jesus, basically, which is what I had experienced that moved me to join the Jesuits in the first place. So I wanted to share that. And I also, so when you have something that's so precious to you, as we all know in the parishes and in schools and so on, when there's something precious to us, we want and we're eager to offer it. And then when it's not accepted and maybe even rejected, it's extremely painful, and it can be a place of great discouragement. So that was the place of discouragement that I was in at that point, sitting in that chapel in those afternoons. But anyway, as I would do that every day, I'd sit in there and kind of mutter to myself in various ways. I'd be mad at those kids, and then I would say, well, maybe it's not the kids' fault. Maybe it's their parents' fault. They didn't raise their kids right, and they're not respectful, and so on. And then I thought, well, it's not really their fault either. They're living in great poverty, and they have trauma in their lives that I have no idea about, but I know it's there. So, and then I would just get mad in a kind of a free-floating way at all the social and economic conditions, political situation, and so on. So it was pretty toxic, though, what I was saying to myself while I was sitting in that chapel. Well, anyway, as I'm sitting there in front of the Blessed Sacrament, I also started to notice, just outside the chapel, there was a little statue out in the hallway. There was a doorway that went out to a hallway, and on that statue there was a statue of the Sacred Heart. And, I guess I had seen those before, maybe statues of Jesus. I knew it was Jesus. I never really put it together about the Sacred Heart, but and I guess I'd seen maybe paintings of it and so on before, but I never really looked at it, to be honest. But in this particular statue, he's going like this. He's pointing at his heart for somebody simple like me, saying, look here, this is it. And then with his other hand, he's beckoning with the other hand to me. And it was as if he started to, as my gaze started to move from myself to that image of Jesus with his heart like that, it was as if he was saying to me, hey, look here, this is it. This is the way I live. This is the way I love. And in fact, this is the only way to live and to love, is to have your heart opened up to the world. And as it gets opened up to the world, it's going to be kicked around. It's going to be pierced. It's going to get wounded along the way. And his indeed is wounded and bloody. But it's also on fire at the very same time. And that really just drew me out of myself a little bit, saying, that Jesus is, I'm just experiencing a tiny sliver of what he experienced, trying to offer the Father's love to the world. I'm just experiencing a little tiny bit of that, but he shows me the way forward to continue to have my heart offered, opened up, vulnerable, even if it gets pierced along the way. But somehow it can stay on fire if I try to live like that. So that got me, that image of the Sacred Heart, and ever since then, the image of the Sacred Heart of Jesus, it really sums it all up for me, what the whole Christian life is about and what my life is all about. If I'm really going to thrive, it's going to look like that, and it's not going to be pretty, but it's going to be worth living, I would later read an essay from then Cardinal Ratzinger, later Pope Benedict, where he gave a description of what the theology of the Sacred Heart is. And at one point in that essay, he said something like, the devotion of the Sacred Heart of Jesus is not one devotion among many. Of all the different devotions that are great within the Catholic Church tradition, this is not just one among many. This is the Christian devotion of the heart of Jesus. Because in that one image, it reveals everything there is to say about who God is and who we are. And so it's God who has taken flesh in the person of Jesus. And just to highlight that even more, it's his heart. He's taken on a human heart. God has a heart of flesh. That's what's unique about Christianity. He's taken on a heart of flesh. And in that heart of flesh, he offers it to the world. And in that offering, it gets pierced. It gets rejected. It gets killed, in fact. And yet, at the same time, there is the fire of eternal life there, the resurrection. So you've got the incarnation and you've got the Paschal mystery all in one image. And it's Jesus offering himself to us too in that very same way. Say this is what true human living looks like as well. So we not only find out what God looks like here, we find out what our humanity looks like by looking at the Sacred Heart of Jesus. Well, I'm sitting there and it's kind of drawing myself out of myself by looking at that image, and then it also occurred to me, hey, I'm also sitting in front of the Blessed Sacrament right now. This is not an image of the heart of Jesus. This is the heart of Jesus given to me literally, sacramentally, every day in the Eucharist. And he is waiting to be loved, waiting to be received. He's willing to give himself away, his heart away on a daily basis. And so it's not just an image that I can have in my mind. This is what the Eucharist means. This is why the Eucharist is the source and summit of my life and our lives as Christians. So there was kind of just a gradual sort of uncovering of this reality of the Sacred Heart during that experiment that I was on Pine Ridge Reservation. So my teaching didn't go that well, but my heart was shaped pretty profoundly in that time. So that's kind of a long intro to the background of the book, but a lot of those stories are kind of in the book as well. But I think the key aspect there is that I started to pray in a new way from the reality of my life. It wasn't some kind of abstract set of theological principles that I was praying from. It came from the gut. It came from reality. It came from reality that was especially painful and difficult for me, not just for myself, but even more so encountering the pain and difficulty of the people around me, students in the classroom in particular, and their families too. So praying from a place of great vulnerability, that took my own prayer and the level of my prayer to a whole other level, and that remains kind of a bedrock for me. Now, as I was kind of stumbling into this place of discovering that spirituality of the Sacred Heart, at the same time, I was also discovering something called the Apostleship of Prayer, which I mentioned before, a Jesuit work that I was not familiar with at all. But this Father Jim Kubicki, who's now the director of it and wrote the book prior to the one we're talking about, he was also at that time my formation director in the Jesuits. So through him, I was also learning about what this Apostleship of Prayer is, and he already had a devotion in this way. So I was learning from him, and I also was learning, part of what was going on in talking to other younger Jesuits like myself who had been doing similar kinds of things in formation, and thinking about and listening to them experience similar sorts of defeat and difficulty and trying to make sense out of everything and trying to have a real friendship with Jesus. It was strange the way Sacred Heart kind of kept popping up in different places for all of us. And a lot of us started to say, including Father Phil Hurley in the audience today, what is this Sacred Heart business? And there's something here, and what is this Apostleship of Prayer? It had almost totally died out in the U.S. and in Western Europe, but in a strange way in all kinds of different places, and also all kinds of people from different sort of theological bents as well. Somehow that Sacred Heart was speaking to a lot of us. So one thing that we did was that among the younger Jesuits, we got together for several summers in a row to just try to rediscover this, like to find out what is this all about, and how can this be helpful not only for our own individual prayer lives, but when it comes to trying to teach other people how to pray and having spiritual conversation and so on. This seems important. It's like simple, but it seems pretty important. And out of those discussions, we kind of realized the centrality of the morning offering and the daily offering that many of you might be familiar with, and there's different versions of it. But this making this prayer from the very get-go in the day, trying to offer to the Lord what are all the nitty-gritty of the coming day, not just the religious, churchy, spiritual stuff. That definitely, our prayer, we want to offer our prayer to be united to the heart of Christ, but also our the mundane things. I want to try to do everything with love, as Mother Teresa put it. Do do small things with great love, or that spirituality of Therese of Lisieux, the little flower, the little way, doing the little things, the hidden things with love. Well, it turns out Therese of Lisieux, for example, was a card-carrying member of the Apostleship of Prayer. This shaped her own spirituality, being a member of the Apostleship of Prayer. So there's something that sinks in, that of course that comes out of the Jesuit spirituality too. There's a common phrase that comes up in Ignatian spirituality, that we find God in all things, not just in the beauty, but in the little things, and even the things that seem ugly and painful and not of God. Somehow those little things can be found within the life of God too. So that spirituality of the morning offering seems key. And then we're also accustomed to thinking about how important that examen is at the end of the day. So that's kind of, depending on how you look at it, the second or the third moment of the day, to look back on the day and to say, how did it go today? And then at the centerpiece of this way of living, with every moment of our day united to the Lord, it makes sense in a new way how the Eucharist is the centerpiece of our lives. And it takes the ordinary stuff of our daily lives, even within the liturgy, that little bit of bread, a little bit of wine, a little bit of water, being offered up together. That's the paradigm for our lives as they can and might be lived. And so out of our conversations, we started to think about, this is kind of a nice way to think about daily prayer. Try to make an initial daily offering at the beginning of the day. At the end of the day, take a few minutes, look back with that lens in mind of that offering. I tried to make an ideal offering at the beginning of the day. Now when I look back, how did it actually go? When I remember the stuff of the day, how did that offering go? When was I really giving my heart away? When was my heart really opened up? And then when did I try to take it back and get defensive and small-hearted and so on? And then how is it that the liturgy itself, the Eucharist itself, is sort of the framework for the fullness of this offering, not just from ourselves, but united to the heart of Christ. So we were kind of gradually, and we thought we were discovering something kind of innovative, and of course that's not true at all. We were kind of rediscovering what was known for a lot of generations before us in this sort of spirituality. But I'm hopeful that this book, and certainly in a broader way the Apostleship of Prayer as a whole, can be a great resource for people in kind of learning how to pray and taking the little things in life more seriously. Maybe I'll just pause here to go through and to read through that kind of a traditional form of the morning offering in English. This is the version I try to say even before I roll out of bed in the morning, before I get going, to try to just shape my imagination a little bit to start off with. So, O Jesus, through the Immaculate Heart of Mary, with the help of the Heart of Mary that's pure and opened up to the Lord, with her help too, I offer you, Jesus, my both prayers and works, my joys and my sufferings, the good stuff and the painful stuff of this day, for all the intentions of your Sacred Heart. So I'm not just doing this day by myself. I'm going to just try to put whatever I'm doing from my heart within your heart, Lord. And that takes some of the pressure off me too, right? I'm just going to do my little bit. I don't need to save the world today, but whatever it is that I'm doing, I want to just situate it within your heart, Jesus. And I remind myself that it's in union with the holy sacrifice of the Mass that's being offered all over the world in every language there is, right? This is literally happening liturgically, sacramentally, every day, every hour around the world, right? So my little piece of the world, my little corner of the world is happening from within the heart of Christ, that is being offered to the Father and for the salvation of the world in the Mass every single day, right? So I try to have that kind of centrality of the Eucharist in mind too. And I want to make this offering of myself in reparation, partly in reparation for my own sins, because I know that I've got a lifetime of living that has been small-hearted in all kinds of different ways, and I've been selfish, and I've been hurtful, and that past can either paralyze me, or I can do something about it now and try to make a new offering of my heart now. There's always a new moment, of course, in the Christian life to make some sort of a reparation for my own sins, my small-heartedness. I want to give a bigger heart today. I want to give a freer gift of my heart today. And I want to do this for the intentions. This isn't just a private devotion, of course. It's always in union with the whole church, certainly sacramentally in the Mass. But it's for all the intentions of my relatives and friends, the other people I know, other apostles of prayer. There are millions of people that are part of the apostleship of prayer around the world, for example, and I don't even know them, and yet they're making this same prayer at the very same time. So there's something very powerful about that, very beautiful, that somehow we're making this same offering of our lives in all the small things of the day. In union with each other. We're friends in the Lord doing this together. And in particular, I offer them for the intentions of the Holy Father. And so in some of your churches you might have, and if you don't already, maybe you could soon, have those little pamphlets that come from the Apostleship of Prayer. When you find out what the Pope's monthly intentions are, his missionary intention and his general intention, that comes from the Apostleship of Prayer. The Holy Father tells the Apostleship of Prayer what his intentions are for the coming year, and then we promote it all over the world so that the whole rest of the church can pray with the Holy Father for his particular intentions. And he zeroes in on different corners of the world and different people in need in every month. And so it's a great way to kind of join with him personally, but with him as the Vicar of Christ who has care for the whole world, really. So it's a way of broadening our vision about how my little small offerings during the day are united to the whole big universal vision of the whole church. And there's something nice about that personal union with the intentions of the Holy Father. In fact, the Apostleship of Prayer has been called the Pope's prayer group. Like, he asks people, especially this Pope Francis, he's always asking people to pray for him. And so this is a very concrete way that we can pray with him and then all of his successors too, for the particular intentions that he has for care of the whole church. So it's a very simple vision, this spirituality of the morning offering. It's very small in a way, and it's very simple, and yet it has absolutely universal significance too. When we're making that prayer as one family, as brothers and sisters, as friends in the Lord, when we're doing that together, we have a sense of how big that is. Now, if you think about that's a bit of the morning offering that we can make. So that's a big offering, and I'm not nearly conscious of a fraction of that when I'm making that offering at the beginning of the day. But when I look back on the day, then it's a way of we kind of see it as like bookends of the day, and that might be a helpful way to propose to people in the parishes and schools and so on. Here's a way to pray. Think about your day as bookends. Begin it with prayer, end it with prayer. Begin it with that offering of the prayers and the works, the joys and the sufferings, in union with Christ, in union with the whole church, for the salvation of the world. Of course, that's one of the things we say in the third Eucharistic prayer. We say, "May this our sacrifice that we're offering right now at this Mass, may it be for the salvation of the whole world." That's really what is at stake. It's big, right? Not just that sacrifice of the Mass, but all of our little sacrifices that get united in that Mass too. The vision is here that we have a way of advancing the peace and salvation of all the world if we do this united to the heart of Christ. Okay, so that's a big offering at the beginning of the day, even though it's said in a few words. Now, at the end of the day, then we want to look back and say, well, how did it go in making this particular offering? And this is kind of a Jesuit thing to do, the prayer of the examen. St. Ignatius, as you might know, when he founded the Jesuits, and he didn't have us pray in common the office, the liturgy of the hours. We're to do that individually. But he said the one prayer that's essential that he said to Jesuits is to do this examen twice a day if possible, but at the very least once a day, to look back and to look and see what God has been doing, how God has been uniting himself to us, revealing himself to us, drawing us out of ourselves in all the little things of the day. So first of all, even if it's 5 minutes at the end of the day, 15 minutes is ideal. To look back, first of all, ask for light in the world, light for our own understanding, and so on. So to ask for light there, so that I can see clearly, just to quiet ourselves down. To begin with a little posture of gratitude. Just thank God for
Father Chris, I'm going to jump in if it's okay.
Sure.
Something wrong with the audio. It's like it's kind of an echo.
Okay.
Do you mind unplugging your headset and see if that makes a difference? Okay. How's that?
Is that any better?
Yeah, see, I think so.
Better?
Yep, I think much better. Yeah, it's a little bit different sounding over everybody, but I think people are saying it's a little bit better. So I think something's going wrong with the headset. So if you're good, you can continue talking,
Okay.
and we'll be all set.
Okay, I'll see what I can do. It doesn't sound the same on I'm not hearing anything on my headset, but anyway, I'll just keep going.
Great.
Okay. So this prayer at the end of the day, just to quiet down a little bit, ask for a clear vision of the day, and then to give thanks to God, have a little bit of a posture of gratitude, and then to get into the bulk of the examen, to remember, just do remembering. And that's a big part of what I talk about in the book, is how it's kind of mysterious how powerful remembering is. And it's not like a big chore that I have to do in saying a bunch of prayers, right? It's just remembering what already happened during the day. And of course, especially if we've got very busy days, we look back and we say, there's all kinds of things that we didn't even notice or pay attention to. And there's a lot of beauty in our days. One day, if we're not paying attention like that, one day can run into the other. It can all just be kind of one big blur, and it gets to be drudgery. It gets to be dull. But when I just take that few minutes to remember a few particulars, it actually looks a lot more beautiful, looks a lot more rich. Even though the day is over, it's as if it's a whole new day that's been given, and just by virtue of the fact that I've remembered. And part of the way that I remember also is I might also remember some things that are not, beautiful sunsets and a delicious sandwich or something, but maybe I remember things that I don't want to remember. I remember that I was really sharp in saying something about somebody kind of caustic or bitter, or maybe I remember something that was kind of hostile that happened to me from somebody else. Maybe they said something kind of painful or hurtful, and I kind of wince at that. Well, I just want to surface all that stuff and then hand it over to the Lord and say, okay, Lord, tomorrow's another day. Tomorrow morning I'm going to make another offering, and I know where some of those pitfalls are during. If I'm doing this on a daily basis, I'm recognizing where some of the difficulties are, and then I can move on from there. So make a little asking for forgiveness at the end, and then I'm ready for the next bookend for the next morning. So now there's a lot that I could say. I'm conscious of wanting to have some time for some back and forth here, but just a brief kind of looking at the Eucharist itself as the third moment or the center moment of the day. Thinking about, I do a fair amount within the book trying to uncover sort of some of the spiritual and just human reality of what goes on within the Eucharist, and in those small, meager gifts that we send up at the offertory, and then how once those gifts are brought up to the altar, what doesn't look like much, we first of all thank the Father for them, and then we call down the Holy Spirit upon these gifts, and then Jesus takes over pretty soon in those words of consecration, saying, the little bit that you've given, I'm now going to be giving back to you beyond what you can imagine. And the kind of spirituality of the fraction rite, for example, the breaking, the reason that we break that bread open and pour that blood out is to indicate Christ's self-sacrificing love for us, and so on. So just kind of spell out a little bit of some of the basic elements of the liturgy, but try to say it in just a pretty normal, human, hopefully accessible, understandable way too in that third moment. So maybe I'll just stop there and see. Does that sound right, Jared? Maybe I could take
Sure.
Should we move into that time for some back and forth?
That'd be great. Absolutely. Let me take controls back over. I'm going to pull my webcam up and invite you to do the same, Father.
Pull my webcam up. How does that work again? Where am I?
I'll send a request your way. So.
Okay. Share my webcam. Okay, there we go.
All right.
Okay. I'll get back into the-
Or is it not letting you do it?
It's like blocking me for some reason.
Huh.
Use
Hardware, share my webcam. Is that that?
There we go.
Okay, good.
All right. Yep. So I have a few questions, and I invite anybody else to jump in with questions if you have some. Feel free to jump in and ask any of these questions about some of the prayer practices that Father Chris invited us to join in with the Apostleship of Prayer and others who also pray these prayers. And we should probably make it clear, but I think it's probably obvious, but these aren't specifically Jesuit prayers or Apostleship of Prayer prayers. These are prayers that many people practice in all different spiritual background, right?
Right. Although that morning offering really does come out of the Apostleship of Prayer per se, I mean, the bigger vision of offering your day to the Lord predates the Apostleship of Prayer, but
no, I love that. I think there's so many. I think the intentions itself, the Pope's intentions, the Holy Father's intentions, and I don't know how many people realize that the Apostleship of Prayer really is behind that. It really is the one that's promoting that into the world.
Yeah,
so,
I never did. So yeah.
Good. So we have a bunch of different questions. I'm going to ask a couple just quickly. I'm just kind of take from a very practical approach. I mean, I love to examine myself, but I often I might do it for a couple days in a row, but then I fall off the wagon and just haven't gotten back to it. I can't find the right time to do it. Any advice on trying to make sure that it really is a daily practice that we bring into our lives?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, it'd be helpful just to know what time of the day is going to be good for you. If it's a quick walk around the block after dinner, if that works for you, great. If it's right before bed, that's great. Just knowing your day a little bit there, and then just kind of sticking with it, making it a habit. Maybe even building it into your calendar. Put it right into your phone to say that now's the examine time. That's can be helpful. But I think part of why maybe it's difficult, and I must say it's difficult for me too. I kind of do it, and when I really get myself to it, it's really fruitful. But I also sometimes it gets a little thin too. But I think having a sense on a daily basis of where's my heart really, and where do I most need help? Am I getting stuck in a rut of like anger all the time? And why is that? Now I can do my examine with that sort of thing in focus a little bit more to say, there's something about I'm feeling angry a lot. Maybe it's because I feel inadequate in my job, or I'm not appreciated in my job or in my family by my spouse or by my kids, or I'm not being respected and I feel defensive and kind of bitter. Well, if I'm kind of zeroing in on what's most kind of vulnerable in my heart, and that's part of what I try to do in the book too, is to give ways to get in a sense of where those vulnerable spots are in my heart. Now when it comes to the examine, I can zero in. Oh yeah, I flew off the handle again. But I know it's not really about what that person said. It's more about there's something in me, in my heart, that needs kind of healing and just needs Jesus to come close, So if I can have a little bit of a lens for that daily examine to get a little bit more focus, I think that can sometimes be helpful too. So.
I like what you said. I hate to make this like a personal question, but I totally find that myself when I'm doing the exam on a daily basis, that same things are coming up again and again and again. For people that practice that, any advice for them when that kind of happens? How do you push past that, push through that, and have some kind of a resolution, a difference in your day?
I would say the thing to do is to try to get underneath it. If I'm like lashing out in anger at people, or if I'm becoming more and more cynical, or if I'm swearing a lot all of a sudden, I don't know why I'm swearing a lot. Well, okay, don't worry about whatever you want to say about the swearing is swearing, but what's underneath that? Why is there this kind of hostility in me? And if I can, again, this is where that mystery of memory comes in too, is if I remember, if I'm getting set off every day because of comments that are kind of suggesting that I'm not adequate in what I'm doing, whether it's in my job or as a spouse or a mother, father, or something like that, if that's getting under my skin, why is it that I feel inadequate? So I want to keep going underneath that, Have I always felt sort of inadequate or like a fraud? Do I have fear that people are going to find out that I'm a fraud at some point? Where does that come from? When did I start feeling that in my life? Did that kind of kick in early on as a kid? Were my parents kind of tough on me or demanding of me, or did I have one big failure as a kid and I've always been afraid of failing ever since then? Like, uncover those early kind of raw memories where I felt great isolation, and then invite Jesus into that, to talk to him about that, like to ask him, what did you see when that was going on in my life? Where were you? Because I've felt always kind of alone in that area ever since then. I think in one way or another, anytime we feel that sense of isolation, that's always going to produce some destructive stuff for us in our daily lives later on. So it's not really about whether that person is good at my office or bad. It's not about them at all. It's about what's going on in my own heart that needs attention and needs healing. And you got to like expose that wound to Jesus so that he can like love me there and tell the truth to me there. Part of what I do in the book is to talk about the discernment of spirits that comes out of the Jesuit tradition.
Yeah, sure.
And one of the things that we all fall for is lies about ourselves, that the evil spirit kind of tries to make us think certain things about ourselves that cause us to shut down in isolation. Either we're no good, or we think we're so good and everybody else is a bunch of losers out there. Too bad they're not like me, Either way, I get the enemy, the evil spirit, gets us to isolate ourselves, and he's telling us a lie. There's some truth to it, but it's always a lie. So I want to like open myself up to be talking to Jesus about what the truth is, and hear what the truth is about myself, in dialogue with him, and not just thinking to myself at all about things, So I don't know if that kind of gets at it a little bit.
No, I think so. And just kind of a follow-up question to that. You mentioned that you addressed the Jesuit tradition and discernment of spirits in the book. Do you also talk about the spiritual exercises? And obviously, that's a part of Examine. Is that where a lot of what you do comes from?
Yeah, I think the kind of spirituality, the apostleship of prayer, and Sacred Heart devotion in particular, I like to think of it as like a condensed form of what the spiritual exercises are all about, really. It's really coming to know the goodness of God, my ingratitude and my sinfulness and my small heart, and then me kind of bringing my heart into union with Jesus over time, in the whole course of his life, and to receive his love and to know what his love is like, and so on, all the way to the cross and then the resurrection. So in a sense, all of this stuff is about the person of Jesus, really, and the spiritual exercises are a kind of an in-depth way of getting into that relationship. But this kind of daily devotional life or spiritual life, spirituality, the offering, and Examine, I think, is a kind of a condensed version of that, to find the truth in dialogue and relationship with Jesus.
Thanks. We've a couple questions have come in, and I want to address some of them. A few people have asked about your PowerPoint. If you'd like to make it available, if it's possible to make it available. Those questions popped up a lot when you're doing the Examine. If that's possible, just kind of your process, that would be great.
Sorry, to make what available?
The PowerPoint available? It's a possibility?
Oh, sure.
We can make that available on the follow-up page tomorrow.
You bet.
Okay.
Yeah.
We have one person who just has a question, a little follow-up question about your story and your experience with the reservation. Just wondering. She's just kind of, I think, personally interested if they're secluded, how they live their lives if they're excluded. Do they know what's going on outside of the reservation? That kind of thing. Is that a part of where that comes from?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, people are very much aware. In fact, in a strange way, like even in the youth culture, it's kind of strange. You're out there in the middle of the plains, and at the very same time, what dominates the youth culture is like hip hop and kind of inner city reality, really. That it's kind of strange. It's almost as if you're in the inner city, and while you're out in the plains, and at the same time you got like cowboy rodeo culture there too. So there's a lot of things going on in that center. But yeah, certainly people are very much just like any of us. I mean, we're aware of the world, but we also get kind of zoned in on our own particulars of our lives too, and we can feel like we're disconnected, certainly. Yeah.
Good. Question about the living the Eucharist part, how would you suggest someone live that moment without being a daily communicant? If you're not going to Mass every day, or if you don't have the opportunity to go to Mass every day, how do you still live the Eucharist in a daily basis?
Yeah. One thing that would be good to do that I never really did, actually before I became a priest, I would go and I would hear those prayers that were being said, and I kind of registered a little bit with some of it, but not really. But actually sit down and get a little Magnificat or Living with Christ, a little booklet or something, and actually read those prayers that are said within the canon itself, and even the prefaces that come before the canon. Like, just take your time and look at those things. What are the things that are being said? First of all, it's incredible, and how it is that it's all about dialogue. It's us, the church, speaking to the Father. It's Jesus speaking to the Father. It's the church being drawn into that dialogue between Jesus and the Father, and we're in the Holy Spirit, and it's really pretty incredible. Even the one line about, this is for the salvation of the whole world, there's a lot of stuff to kind of make us pause in those prayers that are being said. So just to appreciate the richness of that is in itself helpful. But I think also just the basic thing of the movement of the Mass, just being aware of the movement of the Mass. The way we all want to come together and we want to do something. We want to be with other people that need help, right? So everybody showing up at church comes for all kinds of different reasons, and there's rich people and poor people and smart people and dumb people and there's old people, young people. There's all kinds of stuff. People that are really into it, people that are just vaguely there. But everybody's there together. And, the first thing we do is we sing. We do something, try to turn to God like that, and we acknowledge our sinfulness. Everybody is sinful, right? It's the first thing we acknowledge at the beginning of every Mass. And even but we're all in it together. And then even that offertory bit, the thing about sending that little bit of bread and wine up, we send that stuff up in nice vessels, but what's in them is almost nothing, that little bit of bread and a little bit of wine, and that's the whole centerpiece. And to even think about, well, in my daily life, I might think I've got nothing that's even worth offering, and I think that's true in my relationships maybe, or my work, or if I'm retired, I feel like I'm not useful anymore, or if I'm sick, I can't do anything anymore. I've got nothing to offer. Well, go back to the offertory at the Mass. It looks like almost nothing's coming up that aisle, but you send it up there anyway. And then look what happens once you hand it over, even the gospel story about the 12, the loaves and the fishes and everything, the disciples say, hey, this isn't going to cut it, and then Jesus says, just bring me what you've got, and then just watch, just let it happen. Let it be drawn into the relationship with the Father, and then just watch, because what looks like almost nothing can become everything, really. That spirituality of the way the Eucharist works is true of our kind of more mundane aspects of our lives, too. If I offer it with love, look out, it's going to have a big impact, So.
Good, thanks. A couple minutes. Maybe a question just to tailor towards the parish ministers that are here today. Oftentimes I'm sure your experience is the same. When you're a minister serving others, you often get caught up in a lot of the administration stuff, and you lose sight of kind of the vision. How would you say these practices are able to help someone who is busy, very busy, like a Martha, busy, very focused on helping and serving, but maybe losing track of their own spiritual lives in the process?
Yeah. I think starting out with, if we do, there's something about making that offering at the beginning of the day that you can't help but feel pretty small in making that offering, You can't help but think, okay, when I'm situating everything in the whole life of the church, the heart of Christ, the Pope and everything, my little offering is I feel small doing that, So feeling small and poor is like the sweet spot, I think, in our spiritual lives, especially when it feels like everything depends on us and all the work that we're doing in the parish and so on, and everybody's looking at me and I've got to have all the answers. To start off every day knowing that I am like a little weakling here, And that's great. It's okay, but I'm going to give what I've got. And then at the end of the day, too, like I can't help but feel kind of poor and small in a good way when I look back on what happened. Like some of the things I look back on is like, wow, that was incredible. I can't believe that happened to me. Or somebody like loved me and I wasn't really expecting that to happen. I feel small but grateful. Or I feel small because I was so petty with some people. That's also not a bad place to be in, to recognize, wow, why was I such a jerk at that point? But I'm small and I need your help again, Lord. So to try to just keep coming back again and again, to me, to that place of smallness. I mean, everybody has an important work to do in the parishes, and it's big stuff, and a lot depends on us. But at the same time, not really. Just we just show up, we do what we can, we try to listen to people, we try to love people. All the programs that we've got set up are important, but basically it's just our presence and our showing up on a daily basis and offering the little bit that I've got. It's never going to go right, as we know. It's never going to be perfect, but we offer it anyway, and there's something great about that. There's something beautiful about that, it seems to me. So.
Good. I like that. I love that. I mean, so you're so tempted to just want to put it all on you and to be this first person that's going to save the day. But you're right. I mean, putting yourself in that context of that prayer that you shared with us, really, that means a lot. So I'm sold. I'm going to pray tomorrow.
Amen. All right. Yeah, not to take ourselves too seriously, I think. That's a big part of this, too. Within the, even in the discernment of spirits thing, when I was talking about, do that in the book, another Jesuit friend of mine, Father Casey Beaumier, he's at Boston College now, he gave me a great little spiritual exercise that I think is really helpful. He says, like, remember when I was like in the chapel muttering to myself early on when I thought I was praying, but I'm muttering to myself and I'm just getting taken down in discouragement? Well, and it started off like making judgments about all those people out there, those bad kids and those bad parents and all this stuff, or this bad government or this bad history. And I'm making all kinds of judgments. And then pretty soon I was making judgments about myself too. Maybe it's not their problem. Maybe you're just a terrible teacher. Maybe you don't have a vocation. What do you think you're doing here? It got very discouraging and getting turned into myself. We talk to ourselves all the time, and it never, ever goes well, it seems to me, when we talk to ourselves. Because sometimes I'm talking to myself about all those losers out there that can't figure anything out, or I'm talking to myself about what a loser I am and everybody else has their life figured out. But when I'm talking to myself, it never, ever is accurate. There's always some truth to it, but it's distorted, right? So here's a little spiritual practice. When I catch myself with this mantra, whatever it is, whether it's judging other people or judging myself, catch myself and say exactly that judgment to the person of Jesus. Tell Jesus what a bunch of losers all those people are out there are, and how they're not living their lives right, and whatever kind of judgments I want to make about them. Or tell Jesus what a loser you are, that you have no future and nobody's ever going to love you, and it's better if you just like fold up and die. Tell Jesus that. And when I tell Jesus those judgments, it sounds ridiculous every single time. There's something about speaking a lie or a distortion to Jesus. It absolutely vacates the power of the lie. It's like it just sounds utterly ridiculous every single time. So when I say the lie to him, it just doesn't sound right. But now that I'm talking to him, I can get a sense of what the truth is. But as long as I'm talking to myself, it's going to go badly every single time, it seemes to me.
Wow, that is quite a gem at the end there. That's great practice.
Super helpful. Yeah. Right.
Thank you. I love that idea because I think everyone in this webinar have experienced that self-talk that just is this nonsense, but it just tears us up.
And you also end up having like a laugh with Jesus about this dumb things you're saying to yourself about yourself, or what you're saying to somebody else. You just have a laugh, and then you're free. Like your heart gets freed up too, and more light, and you can have a good laugh, and then you just move on with the day from there.
Good. Well, Father, thank you so much for your time and for sharing your stories, especially your stories at the beginning, and also just some advice on how to incorporate these practices into our daily life. I mean, I know that I personally am going to give it a try, and I know others in the webinar are going to try to incorporate this. into their spiritual lives. So thank you so much for offering your time.
Yeah, it's been a privilege. Thanks very much. Thanks to all of you.
Good. Well, if you want a little help along the way, here's the book that Father Chris was talking about today, 3 Moments of the Day, where he goes into in more detail all the different, the 3 different practices that we talked about, and those little tips and tricks that he offered as far as prayer and the spiritual life. If you want to take advantage as a participant in this webinar, as always, you're welcome to take 20% off at AveMariaPress.com using the webinar 909 for today's date. And you can use that until next Tuesday. Just put that promo code in, and we'll send this out in an email afterwards, and we'll also have that presentation, Father, to share with people when we're done. Just want to thank real quickly before we finish up the partners in the webinar: the National Conference for Catechetical Leadership, the National Association for Lay Ministry, the National Federation of Priest Councils. If you're not already familiar with their organizations, please go check out their websites. You are welcome to connect with Ave Maria Press on any of the social networks. We'll have the recording of this webinar on YouTube and Vimeo, so you can check that out. You can also find this recording and all the recordings of all of our webinars in this series at avemariapress.com/webinar-videos. You'll have a number of recordings there going back years and years of webinars, so we're excited to continue to offer it for another year this year. The next webinar in this series is coming up in 2 weeks on Tuesday, September 23rd. We'll be hosting a panel discussion this time focused on a very important topic and a much requested topic for the series, catechesis with Hispanics. So we'll welcome panelists from 3 different dioceses in 3 different parts of the country, and they're all members of the NCCL Federation for Catechesis, the board members, of the NCCL's Federation for Catechesis with Hispanics. So I'm looking forward to that discussion. I hope you all will join us on September 23rd. And thanks again, Father Chris, for being with us, and we're looking forward to your book.
You bet. Thank you. It's been a privilege.
All right. Take care. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.